This is easily the most amount of car you can get for the least amount of money. It has 12 cylinders, twin turbos, timeless styling. It's a coupe that turns into a convertible. Well, maybe that part doesn't work on this one, but there's ample trunk space, ventilated and heated seats. Really, the list goes on. This Mercedes-Benz SL600 cost me just $4,100, and for that you might think I got a once-in-a-lifetime deal. The problem is that I've owned a few of these. They've all been really cheap, and the story has played out almost identically every single time. Today I'll show you all the caveats that are darn near guaranteed to come with a cheap V12 Mercedes, and for a little extra reality check, I bought one of the cheapest examples of one of the best AMG cars ever made, and we'll see how that works out. And just to prove to you how ridiculous the ownership of a 2-decade-old V12 Mercedes can be, I want to do a quick comparison with it and something much newer to the market, and that's this Altas PT Ultra. For starters, our V12 Mercedes uses a hydraulic suspension in order to move around. That system lasted a whole 12 driving minutes under my ownership before a line blew open, letting fluid everywhere, dropping the suspension to the ground and rendering this car pretty much unusable. Now, even though it has smooth 360-degree movement with auto tracking, the Altas PT Ultra uses no hydraulic fluid whatsoever and is powered by a built-in 20,000 milliamp hour battery that lasts up to 96 hours of continuous recording. And during our 12-minute drive, the SL600 would randomly shut off on us. But the Altas PT Ultra is a continuously recording camera, so as long as it's on, it's capturing what's in front of it in 4K anytime, day or night, without any time limits. And while the V12 in this Mercedes gets around 13 miles per gallon on average, the Altas PT Ultra can have power delivered via a solar panel, making it a wireless, self-sustainable, continuously recording security solution. Installation is real easy with the included guides and hardware. Just hook up the bracket high up away from any obstructions and then slip the camera over. Then all you got to do is scan the QR code on the bottom of the camera here in the Reolink app, and in minutes you can control your camera from anywhere in the world. Its picture quality is outstanding, and it stays that way even at sundown, since it has Color X night vision. Just take a look at this. Currently it's pitch black at the time I'm recording, and this is video from my cell phone camera. What's really neat is when the camera senses me, it turns on a spotlight and it begins tracking. And I have a few different Reolink cameras linked to a home hub. You can put up to 2 512GB micro SD cards in here, and it will store your footage offline. This allows you instant access to your footage, and since you own it, there's no subscriptions or fees, period. So if you're looking for a home or garage security camera with the power of a V12, but without any of the compromise, you're gonna find it over at Reolink. Right now they're hosting their launch event, which means you'll find prices up to 20% off. I went ahead and linked it down in the description. Seriously, the Altas PT Ultra has the best image quality you're gonna find in a wireless camera that continuously records, and with a feature set that is unmatched at its price point. You can learn more about it over at Reolink. And when I first saw this SL600 in person, I really wasn't expecting much for $4,100. The auction didn't even disclose its running status and provided only a handful of photos, but to my surprise, it fired right up. The big shocker here was that the suspension was sitting level, and it drove out of the lot pretty well perfect. But it came with the low fuel light on and the needle on E, so I stopped at the first gas station I came across and ran into my first minor issue. Helps having owned one of these before. Try and get this open. Oh, you just see what happened? There we go. So the plunger that opens and closes the fuel door is not actuating. It's very common on these cars, and really the least of our concerns at this point. Now, after filling up, I got back in the car and it sailed for a few hundred feet before it randomly shut off. Oh. This car just stopped completely. Now, the main warning on our dashboard is for an electrical fault, and I'm pretty sure the batteries in this thing are very dead. So honestly, I'm not worried at this point about it shutting off mid-drive, and it didn't do it the rest of the drive home. Actually, everything worked well, including the air conditioner. I was so elated with this buy that I plan to stick a plate on it, order up a few replacement interior parts, and start daily driving it. But in record time, this V12 had other plans. What the heck just happened? A line just blew. I was literally walking away from the car. I left it running. Oh, and something just popped and blew all over. What the heck was that? It smells like ABC fluid. So let's look at what that poof might have been. It's got that smell, that distinct Mercedes, what I remember as being CHF11S smell. CHF11S would be, oh yeah, that puddle down there in the tray. Something definitely did fall down there. I don't want to really stick my hands in this very thin area, but we could check it really quick because there's a stick right here. Yeah, that's dry. We just lost a hydraulic fluid line. Now we have to be careful because we don't want to run the hydraulic pump for a long time without fluid. So I let the car cool for just a little while. Then I took the SL a few feet into the barn. By this point, all the fluid had made its way out of the shock, so the entire car was slammed to the ground, which created our next issue, and that's the car is so low you can't even fit a low-profile jack underneath it. All right, here's a solution I think that is actually going to work this time. I went ahead and drove the rear of it up on these ramps because there's enough clearance for that, and now that has given us quite a bit more, and yeah. All right, we're gonna be able to get underneath the front jacking points. We'll be able to get this thing up in the air and see exactly where that line blew. All right, we are looking for fluid in a broken hydraulic hose. Now, these hoses run all over this car, and some of them are power steering, some of them are for the suspension. At first glance, these ones up front here look nice and clean, actually. They look like they even might have been replaced. They're that nice. All the coolers look really good and nice too. It's not like this car dropped to the ground. Someone was driving it and banging up the front end here. Everything is actually decent. Now, if we get a little bit further back, I'm starting to see some grime. But if you look up above, that's more of an oil mess. If we come right here, this is where your engine is. You see the engine mounts right there. And I would imagine there's a turbocharger in close vicinity. And so it makes sense that oil would be coming from this area. So that is most likely just oil. I don't think that's the source of our hydraulic fluid. When I opened the hood, I saw it more towards the front here. Let's go over to the driver's side. I'm seeing something right about here. That's got to be it right there. That's our busted hydraulic fluid line. It's right next to the accumulator, actually. Like I said, these lines right here look pretty nice and fresh. The line that blew open here does look a bit older. That's not necessarily the reason why the line itself would have failed. This system is under a lot of pressure, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But otherwise, again, for a car that was $4,100, everything looks kind of normal. We've got an oil leak coming from around the pan here somewhere. There's definitely some oil weeping around the rear main seal area, which might not actually be the rear main at all. Now, this hydraulic suspension is way ahead of its time. Anybody that's ever driven one of these Mercedes cars with the ABC suspension knows that it is like unmatched. Even when it comes to today's cars with the air suspensions, with the mag ride suspensions, there's nothing better feeling than a hydraulic suspension, but there's nothing more problematic. And that's why it's so important to realize that you could pull that line off the front, and it's a bit of a headache of a job because how far down the car that line is actually routed. It looks like it's pretty simple when you're just looking at where the break in the line is, but it actually runs down and it runs underneath the catalytic converter. And since you've got such a large engine, you got to start moving things around, potentially taking out that cat in order to just get that fluid line up. But say that the fix was as simple as removing that line, either going and getting it repaired or just replacing it. Well, I'd be all about it. But the big issue is why these hoses end up breaking. And it's usually because of a failed accumulator. Now, this fluid is sent all around the car because all four shocks are hydraulic at a few thousand PSI. And these accumulators are responsible for dampening the force of the fluid. They fail over time, and there's a rubber diaphragm inside that kind of perishes, and these pieces of rubber will make its way all along the fluid lines, creating blockages. And when you have a few thousand PSI of fluid moving around with failed accumulators that are no longer able to dampen the fluid, you've got major pressure being put on restricted areas, and you get a blown out hose like we got here. Now my friend Alex from Legit Street Cars bought a CL600. It's a similar car to this, but a little bit of a bigger body. And he had to take the engine out of the car and take the cylinder heads off the engine in order to stop its major oil leaks. I think we've got the same exact issue that he did on his car, where it looks like you've got a rear main seal, but it's actually an O-ring internal to the engine that requires dozens of labor hours. It is just a ridiculous job to stop an oil leak, but nothing compared to the problems that he had with his ABC suspension. He would replace a line and then another one would blow. He'd replace that line and then another one would go. And again, this is usually because you've got built up pieces of rubber accumulator stuck in the lines here, and unless you get them all out, you're going to continuously have problems. So in my opinion, the only financially sound way to continue to enjoy this specific SL is to delete its ABC system. That's going to require you to buy a coilover setup, about $1,300 to $1,500. You're going to have to buy a used power steering pump to replace the tandem pump. By the time you sell off the pump that came in this car, you probably end up getting that for free. And while it's not going to ride as nearly as good as the factory ABC suspension, it's going to save you a lot in headaches. There's no way to keep on top of this ABC system and actually enjoy this car. It'll continue to have problems, especially given how old it is. The Mercedes purists will tell you that when you delete that ABC suspension, you're getting rid of one of the best parts of this car, and I couldn't agree with them more. So that's why I want to ask you guys, what would you do with this? Given that we've paid $4,100 for it, is it worth sinking a couple $1,000s in it just to get the suspension sorted? That's the only reason I haven't sent this thing back to auction yet, is just because it's begging to be fixed. But boy, you could spend a lot of money very quickly to have a basket case car in your hands. But when these V12s are running, and believe it or not, the V12 itself, it's decently reliable. It will leak oil probably for the rest of the life of the car. But when it's running and when it's driving, it is an unbelievable driving experience, and they just are not making things like this anymore. With the V12 out of commission, I had to fill the Mercedes star-sized hole in my heart with something else, and what better than arguably the best modern enthusiast AMG, the naturally aspirated 6.2-liter V8 C63. These cars have a cult-like following, and for a great reason. The big V8 revs and sounds like nothing else. Nice examples of these cars can easily fetch over $30,000, so for just $9,000, I didn't feel like I could lose too much on this one. Again, I bought it over 1,000 miles away just based on some auction photos, and well, I clearly didn't look hard enough at said photos. I'm just cleaning up everything I found in the passenger seat here before I go on a drive in it, because I'd hate to get pulled over with things that aren't really mine and be asked questions about why they're here and why the car smells a certain way. The heck is that? Yeah, I always wondered what happened to fake fingernails when they get old. Oh boy, this is gross. Oh, look, another one. Oh, a different color though. Looks pretty. Would you believe me if I told you I found half a Viagra in that seat, but then it dropped in the cushion here and I don't know where it went. What are we thinking? This car gonna pull all right? Oh yeah. Yeah, it works. That's the best part of the car so far. Let's see, do turn signals work? All right, left turn signal works. Right turn signal. Oh, does not work. Seriously, name any accessory in this car, and there's a 50% chance that it worked. So much of it is broken, and it won't stop making this dinging noise because it thinks the hood is open, and I'll show you why in a moment. But what was even worse was the overall aura of this car. It gave me the heebie-jeebies just being in the driver's seat and having to touch this steering wheel, which was extremely important on this specific car because every traction and ABS warning was lit up on the dash, permanently disabling the stability control. Now, we haven't even mentioned the Achilles heel of these cars, and that's the catastrophic engine issues caused by stretched head bolts. The early versions of these cars, and this one is an early version, used bolts that would weaken over time and stretch, causing your coolant to mix with the oil, which if you didn't discover immediately, you'd destroy your engine. Some of these cars had their head bolts replaced, some not, but if we had this problem, surely this car wouldn't be running as well as it is now. I did all the basic checks and it seemed pretty legit. The check engine light even went off by itself just after a few miles of driving. Now, this car was sold at the dealer auction by a bank. I really like buying from banks because their core business isn't flipping cars. They tend to do no reconditioning, they set low or no reserves, and that's how you end up with a cheap AMG like this one. But the one negative about buying from a bank is that they tend to repossess stuff like this. And while I can't tell you that this was a repossession because I didn't get any repossession paperwork with it, I think it's in worse condition than any repo I ever bought. And if you just took a quick look at the walk around, it kind of just looks like an average condition car. That all falls apart when we get closer. So when I first got it, I noticed off the bat this front bumper was split. That's not the end of the world. It's a bit chipped up everywhere, so you might think it just needs a respray. This thing ran into something up front. I don't think it was a severe accident, but they repaired the bumper in a shoddy fashion, and then they used wood screws to mount it to the radiator support. And while I did notice the dulled headlights in the auction photos, what I really didn't see was how far off of alignment everything is in this front end. You could see specifically from the headlights. Look at how this headlight kind of sinks into the bumper here. It's tilted a lot lower than the driver's side. So let's just say that we need a new bumper to make things really nice here in the front end. And then a lot of the things that go with the bumper. We need grills because every single one of these has holes in them. We need new fog lights because, well, they're smashed in. And then you might end up needing a new set of headlights because if I had to guess, the tabs are all cracked from the accident that it was involved in. For the price I paid for it, it would totally be worth redoing the front end if that were the only thing wrong with it. But after just a few minutes of looking at this car, I noticed that the entire thing has been repainted. And while I personally don't mind a car that's been repainted, especially if it looks decent like this one, I do kind of mind when they miss an entire panel like the roof. This roof is in great shape. There's no dents in it. All they would have had to have done was scuff it and shoot it. And before they disposed of this car, they used the trunk as kind of like a mini dumpster. And so it's got a lot of parts, which I'm assuming came off of this car. Wheel arch liner, broken splash shield, empty snack pack, cabin air filter. That's good. A cracked carbon lip, like we could expect at this point. There was more junk in here, and after throwing most of it out, I listed the car back at the as-is auction and sold it as quick as I could. I think I ended up losing around another $500 to $1,000 after paying all the auction fees and such. When you're getting rid of a car as cool as an AMG, it's usually a bittersweet moment. For me, that is not the case. I can't be more thrilled to kick this thing to the curb. But it's not leaving without one last reminder of how big of a piece of garbage it is. It's a cooler day here in Florida. We're somewhere in the 50s. I have to keep the window cracked, otherwise I'll get gassed out by the horrific smell in this car. At the same time, the blower motor doesn't work, so I have no heat. Luckily, that forced me to find one other thing that does work. Those are the heated seats. They work just fine. So at least someone's gonna get that with this car, as well as a car that straight up rips. You know, they say there's nothing more expensive than a cheap Mercedes, and these two cars have pretty well proven that. But they also say third time's a charm. So I figured that the next Benz that we gamble on will be the one. And since we're not out much on these, it's time to raise the ante. Until then, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching today, and I'll catch you very soon.